Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 22 years of law enforcement analysis experience. He started his career with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety and is now with the Eden Prairie Police Department. He has worked on the 2008 Republican National Convention in St. Paul, Super Bowl 52 in 2018, and the United Healthcare CEO funeral in 2025. He's here to talk about, among other things, law enforcement analysis writing. Please welcome Ryan Kapaun. Ryan, how are we doing?
I am doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
I am glad to have you. I am definitely interested in talking about writing and presentations in law enforcement analysis. That gets to be a little bit of my soapbox here on the podcast. Looking forward to your perspective on the subjects. All right, so let's get started from the beginning, though. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth on the shores of Lake Superior for a degree in communications, hoping to write press releases, do marketing, maybe work for a political campaign. And in college, I got a job working for the Minnesota Duluth Superior, the Duluth Superior Dukes, which was a minor league baseball team. And I started as an intern, and they let their media relations person go about a month into my internship and promoted me to be director of media relations. So I did that for 2 years till the team relocated to Kansas City, moved back to the Twin Cities, and was looking for something related to my degree in field and applied for a job with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety as an information officer, where that job was kind of advertised as being more kind of press releases and writing, promotion of some certain grants for the Department of Public Safety. But as government bureaucracy happens, this was shortly after 9/11, and the Department of Public Safety had just created their Department of Homeland Security within the Department of Public Safety, and they hired moved a BCA, a Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigator, over to start that division, and they needed somebody to help him. And so the closest job description that they had of a job that was open was that information officer job. So I applied and got the first crime analyst job or intel analyst job with the state of Minnesota with the Department of Public Safety without realizing that's what I was applying for.
You really fell into it, right?
I literally, yeah, I did not know. I had and that agent who gave me my job and led me on the path of where I am today was so swamped. He needed somebody really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I was in that stack of resumes, and my wife's aunt, it was girlfriend at the time, now wife, but her aunt worked for human resources for the Department of Public Safety for the state of Minnesota. And so that agent, Jeff Luther, had come to her and was like, hey, give me like the one or two people I should interview. I don't have time to sit through a ton of interviews. And she said, well, here's these ones that are of note. And then this one is also dating my niece. And he said, yeah, that one looks good. And I met him at a breakfast diner in St. Paul and did an interview over like an omelet. And then he said, I'll get back to you when I can. And before I'd gotten home, he called and offered me the job.
Nice. Yeah, it's cold up there in Minnesota. You just needed a warm body.
He did just need a warm body. So I helped create the Intel Center for the state of Minnesota, which is now the Minnesota Fusion Center, and worked there for several years before the city of Eden Prairie hired me away.
All right. And I do want to get into that development with the state and then to Eden Prairie. But real quick, way back when you were working for the baseball team, some of these minor league baseball teams or minor league teams really get into some wild marketing and ploys to get people in the seats. And so I'm just kind of curious, what was some of the things you got into when you were working for the baseball team?
Yeah, so that team was in the same league as the St. Paul Saints, which up until recently was owned by Mike Veck and Bill Murray. So there was a lot of things that the St. Paul Saints were doing, kind of revolutionary with in-game stuff and promotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to compete with them in Duluth. Duluth is like 2 hours north of St. Paul. And we just had a really, really small staff. So it was everybody doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was the director of media relations, writing the game notes and the game programs and baseball cards, but there were times where I was the public address announcer and doing in-game on-field stuff to help out. But it was a lot of bands in the parking lot or bands in the stadium. On off nights, a couple times we had boxing matches and like ultimate fighting on home plate, trying to sell some more tickets and sell some more beer. There was certainly dollar dog nights and dollar beer nights, which would get crazy as you'd expect. But it didn't get too crazy of promotions that I can remember, mainly because we were just such a small staff.
I find it interesting because the stereotypical analyst is introverted, may shy away from the spotlight, may be uncomfortable, at least in the very beginning, with public speaking. So I find it interesting from your point of view, you were seeking this as a career, being a PR rep. With your experience there with the baseball and then eventually going into the Department of Safety, I mean, going from that vision of really wanting to be in PR, really dealing with the public, to then like, oh, okay, maybe you're in a situation where now you're dealing with data, not necessarily the public. Talk a little bit about that transition and maybe how the PR stuff helped you once you started to get into the analysis.
Yeah, I think that background actually really became a benefit for me early in my career, certainly, but now having a lot more distance from that time of realizing how important those couple years were of that transition from college writing of trying to fill 5 pages or 10 pages on a particular topic to writing a profile on a baseball player in which I only have so many column inches that need to fit into that spot, and writing press releases about game sheets and things that are happening during the games for the media, for the radio guys, and being as brief and as concise as possible, but also getting all of the important things that I want to share into their hands so that they're sharing that info. And really, like, that is so similar to what I'm doing when I'm writing information bulletins for patrol officers, of taking that concept of a press release of who, what, where, when, why, when, what does the graphic design look like, what does the headline look like. I only need you to read that headline and read that first sentence to know what's important. And if you keep reading, amazing, you're going to get great stuff out of it. But if you don't, I still got the concept that I wanted to get across. And that was true for baseball stuff, and it's true today for when I'm writing about a burglary series.
All right, nice. Let's get into you walking into the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. And as you said, you started to establish the center a little bit. So just go into that for those first year or so of walking in the door and what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah, that first year was really just the flood of information coming from federal intelligence agencies to the states because of them getting dinged for not sharing info pre 9/11 and then post 9/11 in the years after 9/11, of just a flood of information. So what the state of Minnesota decided they needed was kind of a gatekeeper for that information, of weeding out what's not important versus what's important for law enforcement in Minnesota. So my job was to dismiss the hurricane intel briefs that the federal government was sending to make sure that our law enforcement wasn't being bombarded with those, knowing that when they opened something from the fusion center, that it was going to be pertinent and timely for them. But not only were we doing that, I had to help create the database of how were we going to get that info to the beginning was to police chiefs across the state of Minnesota and sheriffs to get them that information? How would we create that mechanism to deliver that? And so we created, initially it was an email database. Well, that's difficult to maintain. And so then it was working with third-party vendors to figure out, is there a secure website where we can host this data, and sending that out. But that comes with its own issues of law enforcement data, of what can we house on a third-party vendor's website versus what needs to go out separately, maybe more securely, and really that balance of what can we share and what can we not share.
For the listeners, we're talking 2003 to 2007 timeframe here.
Correct.
So not a lot of social media going along at this time, and a lot of departments are just getting websites. And as he mentioned, it's the period of time post 9/11 where sharing of data and training and just an explosion in terms of information being out there for law enforcement, just for not only intel but also training opportunities. There was been a lot going on. That was a big gate to keep for you.
It was in getting not only the mechanism to push that information out, but also helping create those public-private partnerships of how do we get information to us of what those corporations were seeing. So Minnesota is home to a lot of Fortune 500 companies, but also several Fortune 1000 companies. And how do we get that info, and as well as all of our critical infrastructure, especially in the Twin Cities metro area? So when, I don't know if you remember the 35W bridge collapse in Minnesota, I believe that was in 2007, that the Army Corps of Engineers, we had been sharing information with them on just critical infrastructure stuff. So they had my contact info when the bridge collapsed, and the Army Corps of Engineers has offices right on the Mississippi River next to where the bridge collapsed. So there's a famous video that was seen of the bridge literally collapsing into the water. And outside the Army Corps of Engineers, I was the first one in the world to see that, because we had a partnership with them and they had my contact info. So they called me right away and said, how do we send this video to you? We think you can figure out how many cars were on the bridge when it went down. But it was because of those relationships that we'd established that they felt comfortable in sending that off to us.
Yeah. And were you able to figure out how many vehicles were on the bridge?
That was such a crazy day. I had actually driven over that bridge about an hour and a half before it collapsed.
Wow.
On my way home, and then got the call as I was running some errands and got back into the office. And I did help the Emergency Operations Center try to figure that out, but it also was getting that video to as many stakeholders that we needed to help kind of figure out where the cars were, how many cars were on there for the emergency responders that were responding to the scene.
When you're sending this out, is this email?
In that particular one with that video, I can't remember exactly how, because we were in Minneapolis. Our offices were in Minneapolis, and we were trying to get to the Emergency Operations Center. I don't exactly remember. I was probably trying to get emailed chunks of the video out at that time.
Yeah. And then what was the cause of the bridge collapsing? I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, it was under construction at the time. So I believe the term was gusset plates, that there was just some plates kind of holding the bridge together, ended up failing from years of weather deterioration, but also then the weight of the construction and rush hour traffic across it at that time.
Oh, man, that's awful.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes during this time period. I'm wondering, was there a frustration with the data flow? Because obviously you're trying to establish relationships with people and, when pertinent, get the data out as quickly as possible. But obviously the data that you're dealing with is probably very different in different formats, just like all analysts deal with it. The data's crazy and not uniformed. And so you're trying your best to work with the data and push the data out at the same time.
Yeah, it was a really difficult time of also just different stakeholders. So what's important to law enforcement and police chiefs and sheriffs in northern Minnesota along the Canadian border is completely different than what's important in a major metropolitan area. And so it was trying to not only figure out how to disseminate stuff and what you were going to disseminate, but what was pertinent to different regions and different individuals, and also how much info to share. So I remember times where we would want to be putting together threat briefings about a presidential visit, and it had been reported in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune in the newspaper that the president was coming to town. And so we would be trying to figure out where he would be going and helping the cities where he would be come up with threat assessments, and then get pushback from the federal government that, well, that's not official yet, so you can't publish that or broadcast that out. And you're like, well, it's in the newspaper. Like the 10 o'clock news is reporting he's going to be here on Tuesday. So there's that frustration at the time of just what was important to me might not be important to a big city police chief, but it might be important to a suburban police chief or a rural police chief.
Yeah. So how much autonomy do you think you had during this time?
So much autonomy to pick and choose, because I started as a first analyst, but then we grew and hired several more analysts in the Intel Center. But because I was a first analyst, I was able to set templates and formatting and subject matter. And so looking back at being whatever I was at the time of 25 years old, 26 years old, and being to kind of dictate what I believed was important intelligence for law enforcement officials. Yeah, I had a lot of autonomy on formatting and the content of what I was putting out.
I think that says a lot about your judgment. Because obviously, I wouldn't imagine it would take very long if you were making those around you look bad, that you would have such autonomy for very long.
Sure.
Given some of the high profile information, and as you said, you get into politics, and that's a game in itself.
Yeah. And at the time, our governor was, I think, ran for president, and so or was mulling a run for president around that time. So it was super important that information be correct and timely, and because it was not only a reflection on me and my superiors, but ultimately on the administration in the state.
Before we go on to Eden Prairie, is there anything else you want to share regarding your time with the Department of Public Safety?
I learned so much about myself of just breaking news and world events and trying to filter out how is that world event important to what's happening in Minnesota? And then how do I take that complicated event and parse that down to a couple paragraphs of what I think is important and what I think our law enforcement in Minnesota need to know about that event. And that really did help me a lot once I got to a local law enforcement agency.
Yeah, I find that fascinating too, because I remember as an analyst working and doing more case support type stuff, and then having a manager come in that says that wanted a lot of strategic analysis and wanted us to be finding stuff that happens halfway around the world and how it impacts our local jurisdiction. And I remember that feeling that was like such a daunting task, because what was in front of me at that point was a lot of local cases, a lot of local information that was just local, let alone what was going on in the state, the United States, or even a different country altogether. So that would have been around the same time that we're talking about here, that I was asked to do that. So it's fascinating that you were able to establish that flow from the big old world down to the smallest jurisdiction.
I mean, sometimes it was hard though, just because at the time Al-Qaeda bombed a train station in Madrid. Does that really have meaning for law enforcement in Minneapolis and St. Paul? And so sometimes you're drawing meaning on it because you think you should, but then you're taking a step back as you're writing it, and you're like, I don't know what my point is in writing this outside of an event happened halfway across the world, but does that mean that we're also under a threat or not? And so soon after 9/11, that there was that feeling of, well, everything could be a threat and should be a threat, so you almost have to over-report on it.
Yeah, because it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. If you report it and it's nothing, people are wondering why. But if you didn't report it and it turned out to be something, people are wondering why.
Well, and that's what for analysts in the Fusion Center, I remember a lot of our arguments of what to include in bulletins was around that. Is it if there's a large gathering, the All-Star game in Minneapolis, certainly that could potentially be a target, right? It's on a world stage. But is a Twins game 2 weeks later that also is a sellout against the New York Yankees, is that equal to as a threat? Should that get mentioned? Or that just happens 81 times during the summer, so it's not a big deal? And those were struggles that we went back and forth with in those early days of what was of note and what's just an everyday occurrence.
You just got me thinking. It was also right around this time where the Department of Homeland Security would come up with those color markers.
Yep. Yes.
Right? The
Yep. Probably
different
red or
shades
yellow.
of like orange. Yes. Yes. And it was like, and it was just that moment where like see something, say something. There was different campaigns and to try to just go about doing your everyday business or high alert, or they were trying their best to come up with a system that folks could understand but still somehow be actionable. And I don't think they still have it. So I don't think it did what it was supposed to do.
No, because every time you're at high alert and then nothing happens, everyone's like, well, did we need to be at high alert? But was it negated because you were on high alert? And so it's really hard. I mean, it's no different than crime data on the local level of it. Did you actually prevent it from happening, or did it just not happen?
Yeah. That's interesting. All right, well, let's move on then to Eden Prairie. And so this transition from going from the state to this local jurisdiction, how did that come about?
It was a captain from Eden Prairie Police Department was on loan to the state of Minnesota to help create the Intel Center and get it started with policies and procedures. And he realized that the future of law enforcement was going to be kind of intel-led policing, and that Eden Prairie, which is now an agency of about 75 officers, 15 miles southwest of Minneapolis, that they needed to lead the way and hire a crime analyst. So I believe I was the first or second suburban crime analyst in the state, and probably one of the first 10 crime analysts in the state of Minnesota. But because I knew him, I was able to help kind of create that position profile that certainly fit my background. So it was a pretty easy hiring process for me.
But then I guess, what about the transition though? And maybe that's what you're getting at. You were able to customize it for you. Just that transition going from the state level to Eden Prairie. Because just for the listeners, how big is Eden Prairie?
So it's about 60,000 people with a suburban mall, and I think there's 3 Fortune 500 companies headquartered in Eden Prairie. We also have the third largest Somali population in the state of Minnesota and a large Indian population, fairly affluent neighborhoods. But it was, as far as transition, it certainly helped that I was the first analyst hired by Eden Prairie, because just like my job with the state, I was able to create the position into what I had in my head without having to follow in somebody else's footsteps and hear, well, that's not how that person did it, or this is how we've done it. So it was every new product that I did was, a success just because they had nothing to compare it to. But it was a struggle for me initially of looking at that global and statewide level and creating information and bulletins, intel for patrol officers. And what helped me the most was when I would write those intel bulletins, of being in roll call when they're passing it around and seeing it, and really focusing on their body language of, did they spend a lot of time on that, or did they just glance at it because I was in the room but didn't really care about it? And I realized that when I was focusing on those kind of global like events that I had focused on with the state, that those were the ones that weren't getting a whole lot of, extra gaze on the piece of paper. But when I was focusing on the more local level stuff, that naturally that's what they were more interested in. Where's the warrants? Where's the burglary suspect? Where are the thefts going to occur? What's the background on that domestic assault that we had the other night? And so that really became my focus on that really micro level. Or if there were global events, I had to figure out, back to that press release, of how to get their attention of how I think that global event pertains to their job and their job in the next 12 or 24 hours.
I find that interesting because I found as I talk with analysts over the years and in similar situations to you where they were the first analyst at a police department, and sometimes the first it's the first they're a first time analyst. At least in your case, you at least this was your at least your second go around. But I that aspect of just creating the position and figuring it out. And in hindsight, in my career, I did a lot better being part of like an established team as opposed to trying to cut my own path. But some people really enjoyed being in that situation where they were able to make it their own. And it sounds like that you were in that same boat.
Yeah, as the Intel Center grew, I still am really good friends with several of the analysts that started with me at the Intel Center, but because I was the first one and I had my ideas of how it was going to go, it was sometimes a struggle for me to have some other people in the room with some other opinions about the projects that I wanted to work on. And so I found it actually a little bit easier for me, not of not sharing, but of being the one to kind of take the lead on especially now on cases, and just to be able to be a part of kind of everything.
So you talked about the struggles in the beginning, and I think analysts talk about this a lot, that the frustration of either no one reads the emails, no one reads the bulletins. I think Steve Gottlieb once said he purposely put the bulletins on colored paper so then he could check the garbage can after patrol to see how many were in there. He could easily see them. But for you, though, as you talked about this, I'm fascinated to know, given your background, we're going back to the fact that hey, you went to school with communications, you have that discipline of PR. What was your process of going through and said, okay, this stuff isn't working, going through and basically working it out until things started to work?
Well, it was making sure I was doing ride-alongs early on and just kind of getting a feel for what they were interested in and what the problems were that maybe I could help solve. And it was that, again, that body language of every time I wrote an advisory, I would make sure it was done before we have a roll call we have several roll calls throughout the day, but there was always one at 2:00 in the afternoon. So I would make sure that advisory or bulletin would be done right before 2:00, and then I would personally hand it out and just read that body language, and knowing that nobody ever or rarely would turn to the second page. So it was obvious to me that it had to be on one page. And then I don't do a lot of maps because they know where if I am writing about robberies of gas stations in the metro and the gas stations that are being robbed at 3 a.m, well, they know which of the two gas stations are open 24 hours a day in Eden Prairie. I don't need a map to map that out for them. So that freed up space in my head on the page of other information that I could include. So it really ended up being not only what am I writing, and getting back to that kind of baseball stuff and that press release stuff of who, what, where, when, but also that graphic design mentality of what does my advisory look like and how can it be incredibly functional. So I want it to look similar every time, knowing that when I write about a burglary series and they're going to a burglary or an alarm call, and they remember that I wrote something about that burglary series, and they're bringing it up in their squad laptop, driving 70 miles an hour to that burglary, that I've trained their eyes of where they need to look, of where is that suspect, always on top on the left. Picture of the vehicle is always on the top on the right, because that's going to pop up first in their laptop. And then in the headline is there weapons, that's always capitalized or in red, and certain things that are in bold, and they really just need to read like a press release, that first sentence or that first two sentences. And then everything below that on that page is really justifying how I got to writing that first sentence.
Yeah, well, I like the standard, as you said, it trains their eye. I think that the first point that you make almost outweighs the graphic design in a way. You need to understand what information that they're looking for, what information is most pertinent to them, and you did that by getting to know them.
Yes.
And so the information, yet granted, yes, a good a good bulletin has to have a solid graphic design, but I think honing your skills in to say, okay, this is what they're after, this is what they want to know, this is what they need to know. It could be the best graphic designed in the world, and if it's information that they don't care about, it's they're not getting past page two, just as you said.
Sure. And it also is where I have certain products that I write, a monthly comp stat, the bulletins, certainly some monthly stats. But from the beginning, my focus on the bulletins was my audience is for this product is patrol officers.
Hmm.
And so it's really trying to deliver it just for everybody in the department sees my stuff, but what specifically do those 35, 40 officers need to see, and what is that information that they want? And they've been really good over the years of sending me that info. Maybe they're on a suspicious call that really end up being like a dumpster diver in the middle of the night, but they just got a weird feeling about maybe something else that they couldn't prove. And
Hmm.
I'm getting those emails daily from 2 a.m. of them just saying, hey, check this body cam, see if there's something more to that. And a lot of times that's the information that I use to turn around to send out to the rest of the department.
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of working in such a small jurisdiction where you're dealing with 30, as you said, 30 officers. There is, while you are maybe the sole analyst and have to be the jack of all trades, almost everything goes through you. So you're aware of so much more of taking the temperature of the town because everybody's going through you asking for stuff. So you can remember what you did last month or 2 years ago, and it might be important now. Do you feel that way? Do you feel that, like, hey, because it's smaller, it was a lot easier on you to kind of deal with all these requests?
Absolutely. I feel bad for analysts that are in really large departments that are sending maybe really good information out to 500 officers or 1,000 officers, but you're not getting that immediate feedback of was this helpful or not helpful just because you're separate from them. And being in a mid-size agency, smaller agency, I'm able to really get that immediate feedback of was this helpful or not helpful, and taking that information and using it for my next product.
Hi, this is Sean Fisher, and at my work, we're known as the Nerdery, and we're proud of it. Embrace who you are.
Hi, this is Angela Backer-Hines, and I just want to remind you to give yourself a break. As analysts, we strive to have all the officers in our department utilize our skills, and we typically want to be everything to everyone and do everything we can each day. But work is much more manageable and less stressful if you embrace the fact that it's okay to take some time for yourself, and maybe even to say no once in a while. In analysis and in life, you have to give yourself a break or you risk burning out, and then you're no good to anyone. So just remember, it's okay to give yourself a break.
Hi, I'm Matt Sessions, Learning and Research Consultant with the Cambridge Centre for Evidence-Based Policing, and my public service announcement is around pet peeves. And my pet peeve is when people say they love coffee and they only drink either fancy milk-based coffees with syrup or they just drink instant coffee. I will even turn down an instant coffee if it's the only thing available and I'm going to have to put up with a no caffeine headache, because I'm so stubborn around this and I will die on that hill.
All right. Well, let's get into a case then. This brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that an analyst works. And so we're talking is about 2015 now, and you are working on a business burglary series.
Yeah, we had a series of business burglaries around the metro where the criminal was breaking into businesses kind of shortly after sunset in strip malls and office parks where it would not be abnormal to have a car parked out front, but also most of those businesses were closed, so it was easy for him to see whether anybody was still at the business or not. And I was putting together, I like to be the lead analyst for metro wide stuff to be helpful for other police agencies and but also more importantly for Eden Prairie so that we have the best intel in-house. And I was able to piece together kind of a timeline and start to forecast where I believed that the suspect was going to hit. And when I went to my supervisor who wanted to do surveillance on the suspect to try to get a tracker on the car, but also to catch him in the act, I said, he's going to hit sometime this week, but I can't tell you what day. So if we are only going to focus on one day, I am almost positive, 90% positive that he is going to hit on Sunday. And if we do surveillance, it's going to be sometime between 11 and 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. And so that's when we set up and did surveillance, and I was off by 10 minutes. The suspect hit 10 minutes before 11, but we were up doing surveillance, and so our detectives were there to catch him in the act. But I got a lot of crap for that of being wrong, as they said, but it did help as a badge of an analyst badge of being held up of my value to the department, but also not only of helping catch a burglar, but of the efficiency of people's time to be able to forecast out where he was going to hit and when he was going to hit.
What made you so confident it was going to be Sunday?
It was also Super Bowl Sunday. So we knew that really no one was going to be, it was going to be quiet and not around. But when I had kind of figured out the pattern that he had hit, I think the 4 previous Sundays, he was one of those burglars that was hitting 100 businesses in a month or a month and a half. So he is fairly prolific, and that's where my confidence was in just that pattern from the previous month.
Yeah. Now, given that it was a burglary and it's happening on the weekend, why were you confident that he was actually burglarizing on Sunday? Was the data such that people were discovering it, that it must have happened between this time and this time on a Sunday?
Yeah, some of it was just on Monday morning when they'd realize that the place was burglarized, that they would say it happened sometime over the weekend, but it was going through that pattern of sometimes there was surveillance video to kind of narrow down when he was doing it, and then just knowing his pattern of that. So even the ones that were just, it happened sometime over the weekend, that we had good enough data for me to be able to say, well, even though it happened sometime over the weekend, I'm pretty sure it happened Sunday early afternoon.
Yeah. I really enjoy the burglaries. Not that I wish for victims to be burglarized or anything, but I find them fascinating that they're usually, especially when you have a series and there's a pattern, there's the profile and working its way out just as you did here. I really do find them fascinating.
I agree. I love a good burglary series. A lot of times it's because you're trying to figure out kind of what that pattern is. Usually there's decent data, especially now of surveillance video, so you have really good timestamps of when it happened. But it also seems like burglars are kind of creatures of habit. And so even if they're caught, once they get back out, they're going to go back to that same type of victim of whether it's residential burglars seem to do residential burglaries and business burglaries seem to do business burglaries, and they don't overlap with each other. And we've had several burglars that we've caught 3 or 4 times now in my career where it's the same burglar hitting the same type of venues, almost where it's getting easy of like, oh, this type of burglary occurred in this office park during this time frame. Let me go see if that burglar is out of custody and out of prison. Sure enough, and in this case, this burglar's name is Brian Williams, but we had him again. That case was 2013, and I think we had him again in 2018, and then again a year or 2 ago. So you just know when he gets out, he's just going to go back to those same types of victims.
Yeah, well, that's when you go back to your PR skills and just go to corrections and like, hey, can you just give me a heads up when this guy's going to be released next time?
Oh, there's several that I keep an eye on of when their release date is.
That's really good. How many burglaries were there total in that case?
I
You
think in
remember?
all of his series, it's usually been between 100 and 200 burglaries that he's done,
Oh,
which is what his
cow.
signature is. So that's how we know that it's him, that there's no strip mall burglaries or business park burglaries in the Twin Cities, and then all of a sudden everybody's getting hit.
Oh man.
Yeah, so I remember after we had gotten him, I think in that 2013, if I remember correct, when he was at a halfway house in Rochester, and then I saw information from Rochester that they were getting hit with is like 75 or 100 burglaries in a really short time frame, and they had some suspect photos, and right away it was helping Rochester PD out that, hey, I'm pretty sure this is your suspect.
Well, there you go. Now we know why they go back. I mean, if it's taken them, if they can get away with it 100 times before they get caught, that's. Oh man, that is something. That's a lot. And then for the businesses, you could do some target hardening and do some PR there of trying to do a pop project maybe of like, hey, you might want to tighten up your security here.
Certainly we've done that, but in those types of businesses, it's always a glass front door. So
Yeah.
if he's smashing that, it's hard to kind of harden it outside of making sure that you're not leaving the petty cash in the top drawer at the reception desk.
Oh man. Yeah, interesting. As I mentioned in your intro, you've represented the police department in a couple of high-profile events there, whether it's the National Convention or the Super Bowl or even the United Healthcare CEO funeral. So I guess just as you're the analyst there, in those situations, what was your role?
In those instances, like for the Super Bowl at the time, the Minnesota Vikings headquarters were in Eden Prairie.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the home of the Patriots for that week. And so it was providing social media monitoring and intel of certainly world events and any potential threats in the Twin Cities that may affect Winter Park or the Patriots. And then also helping out in the Emergency Operations Center with any potential threats and intel that was happening around all of the events that come with the Super Bowl in the Twin Cities that week.
All right. Did they win that one? The Patriots?
Oh man, I believe the Patriots did win that one.
That's a whole other level there, right? When you're talking about such big events, there's obviously a lot of security aspect to those events and trying to gather intel and a lot of real-time decision making going on.
There is, and you are, working with certainly the federal agencies had their intel people in the EOC and Minneapolis and St. Paul and Hennepin and Ramsey counties analysts. So everybody had a piece of it and everyone is sharing intel. So you're kind of helping in that bigger global view, but also in the back of your head, also trying to look out for your home agency and my home city of what intel is happening, maybe events that could be popping up in say Minneapolis or near the game, and how does that affect our security for, in that case, the Patriots, but also visitors that were staying in our hotels or just the community in general.
Yeah. So is United Health stationed there?
They are. So their campus, they have United Health and Optum, which is a subsidiary of United Health, but it's under their umbrella. So two really large companies. Their campus overlaps with us in the city in the north of us, Minnetonka. So I think United Health on paper, their headquarters are in Minnetonka, but a lot of their campus is in Eden Prairie.
Now, was that different for you, given the fact that this was based on a murder, a high-profile murder, getting into obviously a lot of politics, nationally known, as opposed to the other ones, Super Bowl, National Convention, not really stemming from violence per se?
Yeah, in the early days of after the assassination of the United Health CEO, of not knowing where that suspect is, that incident happened in New York City. So individually, I wasn't getting a lot of intel of what the FBI and NYPD knew. And so I was trying to figure out how to convey that intel to our local law enforcement, and then also United Health and their CEOs and their higher ups certainly live in the community of figuring out what were the threats and what was possible threats or what was keyboard warriors that were just posting stuff, but they live on a coast and have no means or intent to come to Minnesota. So it was, that time was certainly for the couple weeks after, of just a lot of that intel of doing suspect profiles when we could figure out who the individuals were that were posting threats of did they have the means or not.
Yeah. Now, was he still on the loose when the funeral was going on? Do you remember?
God, they overlap a little bit, but I think he may have been on the loose still when the funeral happened, or had just been in custody. But I don't know that everybody was totally confident if the suspect had acted alone or had help.
Okay, yeah, because I remember he made it out of New York City. I remember it was a little bit of a manhunt. And I can't, but it's bad. It just happened last year. I can't remember how long it was between. Obviously, it was a couple of days, but I'm not sure how long it was from the time of the shooting to the time of the arrest. So was this really the first time you were dealing with like just like a high profile, lots of potential for violence kind of situation, for a lack of better term there, or was there other incidents that you worked on recently?
I mean, really in the Twin Cities, it was in 2020 of dealing with, in the middle of COVID, was dealing with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin riots and what transpired for a week and a half here in the Twin Cities, of trying to delve through intel and protests and looting and riots and eventually the National Guard coming in, of kind of that fast pace of things that were developing sometimes by the minute or the hour, being a lone analyst of trying to parse out what was important to Eden Prairie officers in that moment and how much is too much info or how much is not enough info.
From your vantage point, is what's going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul, is it far enough away, or is it no, we're close enough that we really needed to be on alert?
It was certainly close enough. Our officers were being sent in to help cover either Minneapolis respond to stuff because they were a little overwhelmed, or we were moving into suburbs that were closer to Minneapolis to help cover them while they were sending officers into Minneapolis. So everyone was kind of moving a little bit closer to the epicenter of where major events were occurring. But also there was quite a bit of looting that was happening in the suburbs, especially a couple days after everything had happened in Minneapolis and St. Paul, because law enforcement ended up swarming into the center of the cities, and then events just came out farther from the middle of the metro.
Yeah. So maybe not something necessarily directly in your jurisdiction, but as you mentioned, you have resources going to help out neighboring jurisdictions, and there's obviously activity where Eden Prairie is involved in the response.
Well, yes, and we haven't talked about it yet, but the Twin Cities analyst community is so incredibly supportive of one another. So we were, as a collective, 100 analysts were in chat rooms sharing intel in real time of not only what was happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but what businesses were being targeted around the rest of the metro, and being able to take that intel, and create actionable intel for our officers. So every morning, analysts around the metro were essentially doing a roll call of, here are the businesses. Cell phone store was hit in this city. Here's suspect photos. A liquor store was hit in this city. Tire shop, whatever it was. And I could take that every morning and send that out to our officers and our command staff of, if we're going to have extra resources in the city, instead of just randomly patrolling, here are the businesses that have been hit in neighboring cities in the past 24 hours. Maybe we should focus our resources on those types of businesses. Yeah.
Now, did you find that it was the looting was more coordinated as opposed to like, hey, I'm gonna go get some liquor. Let's just go loot the liquor store?
I think in the early days, it was certainly kind of whatever was nearby where essentially the riots were happening.
Mm-hmm.
But as a day or two went on, I did feel like it got more coordinated by certain groups that knew that there were certain businesses that they had had success with breaking in and getting products.
Yeah. Kudos for all of you for having the chat room still going on, right? That coming on board. You said 100 analysts, so kudos to all of you for coming together and sharing information.
It is every day. Analysts in Minnesota, we use Bridge for Public Safety locally. I think there's 270 some analysts now across Minnesota, Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, but obviously the majority of the analysts are in the Twin Cities area. But a bank robbery occurs and we all know within, sometimes as it's being dispatched out, or a school threat occurs and we're sharing intel in real time with each other, but everybody else is seeing it. So we have that intel if that call were to come into Eden Prairie, but a neighboring city had something similar. I have that information for our officers almost immediately. Yeah, the analyst network locally is incredible. It is.
Nice.
There's no territory issues. Everybody is out to help each other.
Nice. All right, well, let's move on then. As I mentioned in your intro, I do want to chat with you regarding writing and presenting. That's your discipline, part of your education prior to being an analyst. So I don't know if you wanted to take it in a certain direction. I know you've taught this, and so I'll give you the floor. Talk about some of the stuff you're seeing, or maybe pet peeves, or where you can help our listeners.
Wow, it's such a big question. It feels like a conversation for hours, but
yeah.
I think it does come back to what we've talked about a couple times of just that who, what, where, and when, of getting straight to the point right away of what you're trying to convey and then backing it up after that. A lot of my bulletins are not telling officers what to do, but I'm giving them the information to kind of make that decision of what specifically they should do. So it might be, hey, officers should be aware of a white male suspect in a surgical mask driving a 2010 white Chevy Malibu committing restaurant burglaries between 2 and 4 a.m. on Thursdays. And sometimes I'm able to get that specific. And so if they're responding to an alarm call at a restaurant at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, and they are red lights and sirens heading to that spot, but they see that white Chevy Malibu passing them, that they're turning on that instead of waiting to find out after the fact from surveillance video. So it's really just trying to get, it's always the most important spot is first, second most important is after that, and then for my interns, it's always a struggle of going from that college writing to, we joke and say it's kind of my style guide, but of, again, that officer safety stuff of whenever we're mentioning weapons, that's in bold and in red, and warrant info is always in bold. And anytime I mention the word officers, that's always capitalized, because that usually, it doesn't need to be according to the AP style guide, but that's trying to get drawing their attention to their eye. It's really just about taking as complex as you can get and parsing that down to 2 paragraphs at most.
Yeah. I think that's the real struggle, is what to include, right? I think you can get there, but then you're always concerned, like we were talking about before, is leaving out something that you shouldn't.
Right. And it also depends on the context for it. So what I always tell new interns is certainly somebody's criminal history is important when we're writing bulletins and background on an individual. But if they've been convicted of murder and second degree assault with a dangerous weapon, their DWI from 5 years ago probably doesn't really matter for the patrol officer. So it's about what is the hierarchy of what's most important, and those other things, it's really a judgment call, and a lot of that comes with experience of what you're going to include and what you're not going to include.
In terms of your interns, in terms of maybe even some other analysts, what are some, besides what to include, what are some other things that you spot in some of their writing?
I think it comes back to again, kind of that visual appeal, but also an organization. So when you're telling a story, how are you telling it? Is it going to be in chronological order? Is it going to be what you believe is most important to least important? Sometimes that it depends on what the series is or what the events are that you're trying to talk about. It's so case by case basis of how far out do you go from associates, how far out do you go with relatives. For me, it's only if they're in the house and I know that they've recently been in the house. Or a pet peeve of mine is when analysts are using former addresses of an individual, but you're seeing that they're including an address that they were at 10 years ago that's not a mom or dad's house, a possible. So you're just kind of taking up space, and it's easy for the reader to start to dismiss some of what might be really important information that you've included because you've just included too much information.
Yeah, you included something that the reader feels is not important, and then they lose the trust in the document.
Exactly. Yes.
How about in terms of just classic writing, in terms of like sentence structure and the grammar and everything else? Obviously, your interns, I'm guessing they're younger than 25, growing
Yes.
up with social media and typing with your thumbs. And so what do you see in there?
I see a tendency to really want to get into the story from a police report, thinking of maybe we have a PC pickup for a domestic assault suspect, and them really wanting to get into the weeds with kind of maybe what the domestic was about versus what the actions were and what the background is of that individual. So it's going back into who's the audience. Is it for a true crime podcast that wants to know every detail about everything, or is it that officer safety of what that officer is walking up to when they're going to arrest that individual? What do they need to know about the incident that happened or that person's history? So I think it's really, police reports are great to get sucked into because there's almost always really good stories in there, good or bad. But I think it's really easy to get sucked into those stories when you're writing and trying to summarize some of those stories, which may or may not be pertinent to the audience.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, if an intern came to you with a bulletin and it was clearly sent through ChatGPT, what would your reaction be?
Oh man, I would be, I'm not a yeller, but I'd be pretty disappointed because of what I tell certainly interns, but new analysts is people are making decisions on the information that you provided. So it has to be correct. And there are times where I'm just missing an intel gap, but you have to be forthcoming about that. I have all this info, but honestly, I don't know what they're driving. Instead of me listing out 2 cars from that they previously had, but they have tabs that are expired from 2 years ago and they're probably not driving it, because those officers might be looking for those 2 cars and miss a car that they otherwise would have paid attention to if I would have said, I don't know what they're driving. But there's so many times where I've had decisions were made SWAT-wise, officer-wise, of making arrests, and officers have to testify to why they did what they did, and they're going to point to the intel that I provided. Or there's been times where I've testified on the stand about the work that I did and the confidence of the work that I did. So getting back to the ChatGPT stuff, certainly that is starting to come, and I'm seeing a little bit of that, and it's maybe kind of fine if it's summarizing, but it just isn't there yet. And I mean, people's lives potentially are at stake by your work, and so you really can't cut corners.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I have used ChatGPT this year a lot to actually write the descriptions for the podcast episodes.
Sure.
And it's gotten to the point where it knows what I'm asking for. It knows the things that I look for. And I'm not a good writer, and never been a good writer. And so for me, I throw down a lot of ideas, but it does help out with cleaning up the mess that I made in terms of flow and sentence structure and grammar and all that. in a way, it could get to the point where, yeah, it's not necessarily just creating everything from scratch, the bulletin. It's basically cleaning up what maybe the intern started.
Sure, and I can see I can see a use for that. I mean, a lot of times I'm reusing the same template, obviously, from previous bulletins or previous warrant bulletins, and so in a way that would be maybe more efficient. But we're a small enough agency that I can tell you off the top of my head when our last homicides were, where our last robberies were. So it would be different, I think, if I was in a major city and you just didn't have the physical capability to read every robbery report when you're putting out a bulletin about robberies.
Now, you manage the social media account for the police department.
I do.
And
Yes.
I find that to be a whole other level of writing, because now you're writing to communicate with the public, not the patrol officer.
It is, and that is, I actually was looking at our social media kind of end of year stats earlier today, and I think we had 6.5 million views on posts on Facebook this year.
Wow.
And again, it's who are you writing to for the audience? And when I talk to other police departments, our philosophy here is we're communicating with the residents of Eden Prairie, and which seems super simple, but I think sometimes agencies can start thinking about trying to create things that maybe are going to try to go viral or are part of a social media trend. And I'm not against doing those, and we've done those, but again, it's what's the purpose and who's the audience. But yeah, it is a totally different type of writing based on both the platform and the audience.
Yeah, I envision your baseball days, like trying to get a little clever to try to get eyeballs on the posts.
Oh yeah, among my jobs when I was working for the baseball team was writing ad copy for the daily newspaper in Duluth. And so every week I would have to write a different kind of funny ad about our next homestand or our opponent or the time of year or what promotions we were having, which was always fun to be creative and figure out what worked and what didn't work. But you never really knew if in those days if what you were writing generated directly to more ticket sales. But with social media, it is rewarding to see when you're writing a post of did that get a lot of interactions or not get a lot of interactions, and then tweaking that next post to maybe trying something different to try to get more interactions.
Yeah. Now, do you allow people to remark on the post?
We do. Yes.
Yeah. So that's sometimes you're getting instant feedback from people that you have no idea who are.
Good or bad, and sometimes when you're a police department, you're posting some bad things that have happened in the community. Yeah, and it is for me of reminding people inside the PD when there are negative comments. It is rare that those negative comments are residents that are posting. A lot of times it's people outside of the community that are posting. So again, who's our audience? Who are we trying to communicate to? And those that are outside the community that are commenting or viewing it, it just is the nature of social media. But to not take it too personally when somebody from Texas is upset with us for whatever reason.
I'm sure you get some characters on there. I'm sure is there a favorite, maybe a conspiracy theory or a favorite post that you have in mind?
I always talk about, it seems like everything right now in 2025, 2026 can be made into be a controversial post except for animal posts. Anytime we post about ducks saved out of a sewer or a lost dog or horses that got loose out of the one farm left in Eden Prairie, those always seem to get a lot of traction and are almost universally positive comments.
Yeah, because I could just imagine I'm on the Nextdoor app in my neighborhood, and geez, it seems like it doesn't matter what somebody's posting. There's certain people in there that will bring politics into it or all kinds of stuff into the conversation. So.
Oh, that is, yep, absolutely. That's a daily occurrence for us of trying to manage that.
Yeah, but I almost see it similar to your role when you were with the Department of Safety, right? Because again, you are making the judgment of what to post, right? And obviously are trusted not to post something that's going to make the department look bad.
Yes, and so we work really closely with our communications department with the city, and then we have a kind of special projects coordinator that does a lot of our kind of longer blog posts. But yeah, it is about the brand, and sometimes it's a little bit back and forth with some of our officers where patrol is doing amazing work on the street and they want to highlight some of that. And certainly we want to highlight their good work too, but maybe it doesn't always fit into the brand that I have envisioned what our social media is going to have. So it would be I can't think of a time that we've ever had a post showing the cash and the guns that officers recovered laid out on a table. We're more likely to be posting about the car seat clinic or the lemonade stand or a shop with a cop or the more positive things that officers are involved in.
Yeah. Now, from your perspective, doing this for so long, for analysts that maybe they're just starting out, maybe they're just getting assigned social media, maybe they're getting into even press conferences. Do you have some maybe even lesser known do's and don'ts when communicating with the public?
On the social media stuff, it really is a lot of it's just dependent on kind of agency size. That the smaller the agency, the more they can kind of get away with maybe more jokes and humor, where a large metropolitan agency, it would be really hard for them to have a lot of humor on their social media page. And so a lot of it really just depends on the size of your agency. But I think it's so important to just continue to promote the positive things that officers are doing in the community, because there ends up being so much negative news about police officers that the news is there to jump on when officers are doing caught up in something bad or somewhere around the country, and then it seems to be a portrayal that's a blanket of everybody. 10 years ago, Eden Prairie had 2 local newspapers that would highlight those things, but those newspapers are gone. And so there's nobody to do that outside of us on our social media.
No, that's interesting. No, it is always nice to see some good mixed with the bad, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, I know this saying, if it bleeds, it leads, but it is kind of nice to see some good feeling stories, if you will.
It's every day in our department we see the good things that officers are doing, and so yeah, that's what I like to do, is to highlight that.
Let's talk a little bit about presentations, because that's another one that I see. You go to conferences, you see good presentations, you see maybe not so good presentations, and even I've over the years, there's some presentations that, man, I going in, I thought this was going to be a great presentation, and it ended up just not. Again, reading the body language, reading the reviews, I know that I didn't necessarily nail it like I thought I would. And so even me in my late 40s, presenting now year after year after year, still have room for improvement when it comes to presentations.
Well, I mean, that's everybody. There's always room for improvement. I think that my best piece of advice is just enthusiasm just is so contagious. So it's hard, even if you're not interested in the subject matter of a presentation, if that person that's in front of you is engaging and enthusiastic, it's hard not to kind of lean in a little bit on what they're saying. And so I think a lot of it just comes down to your own confidence in the subject matter that you're talking about, and the confidence in yourself that you were chosen to give this presentation for a reason, that you're a subject matter expert, and to kind of show that confidence that you know what you're talking about. But to be so excited about what you're talking about, it's hard not to have other people get excited too.
Yeah, and people find this funny, but my pep talk to myself as I'm about to go up is like they're sitting there going to listen to me. right? Like they're here to see me kind of thing during at least this portion of the presentation. That gets me up to that next level in terms of my presentation. And so I read that I don't know how many years ago, but that definitely has helped that little acknowledgement that this is who your audience is and this is who they're here to see.
It is totally true though. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
so simple, but I've given presentations in front of, I was invited to a class several years ago to talk about crime analysis at a college, and I showed up, had all this work done, and there was one student in the room for that
Oh,
presentation, and I was not told that that was going to be that small of a presentation, but it
yeah.
still is that, like, okay, well, I'm here, you're here, like let's talk about what I love, and I love being a crime analyst, so I'm
Yeah.
going to try to convince you that you should be a crime analyst too.
Yeah.
But I've also spoken in front of crowds of 700 people at a conference, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of getting out of your own head a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
having that nervousness. And if I'm a walker, so at a presentation it's hard for me to be stuck at a podium. I want to kind of move around the room, and so that I can get a feeling for, in what I'm saying, is it hidden? Are people like, do they have their heads up looking at you, or are they all buried with their phone under the table just hoping that your 45-minute presentation is over?
Yeah.
So it's trying to kind of gauge a little bit of that, and maybe start asking, questions of the audience, or asking a question and having a long enough pause to try to get that engagement. And that always seems to help.
Yeah. Do you know Randy Stickley?
I don't.
Yeah, he's like that too, but he has the gift of gab though. Like holy cow, he can talk just about anything. I've seen him present, I've seen him work a crowd at the bar. Like I've seen, like he just has the gift for gab, and what you described there just reminded me of him because he's the same way. He likes to get out from the podium and have that connection and read the room.
Yeah.
And
It does make a difference. It makes a difference, especially like I said, when maybe the audience isn't super into the subject matter, but maybe they're into the presenter themselves.
yeah, yeah, no, it's definitely good. How about advice on PowerPoints?
I it's such a so much simple advice to it that I think it just is so obvious, but it's trying not to have too much text on the screen, because a lot of times it's going to be really hard for people to see in the back of the room. I try to have light backgrounds and white backgrounds because you just don't know what the room is going to be like, or if the sunlight's going to wash it out. A lot of times the bullets are really, really short, and they're just placeholders for me to, as reminders of what I want to talk about on that slide individually. I love, especially crime stuff. A lot of times what I'm talking about is interesting crime stories. And so people want to see the body cam video, if you can show that, or the 911 audio, or as best you can of crime scene photos. So especially when I have cases that have been closed and I can kind of pull a lot of that data for case studies, I try to have as much kind of audio visual stuff as I can have.
Yeah, I've struggled with that one as well because I'm usually pretty good at keeping the slides simple, but I admit that sometimes I get a little bit too caught up in maybe the animation of the slide because I like to tinker with that, but it doesn't necessarily have the impact that I'd like it to have.
I try to keep that animation as minimal as I can, just because inevitably either it's going to go wrong or you're going to forget
Yeah.
that you had that animation, and you're going to click past it, or it's just going to start right away.
Yeah.
But it is like, again, trying to kind of that presentation of trying to move around, but I try to make those slides are just really reminders almost for me than it is for the audience.
Yeah, yeah. I presented ones with animation, and the reveal, like it was supposed to be this great reveal in terms of the section of the speech, and somehow it played in reverse order. So the
Oh
reveal was
no.
first, and I just had to I just pretended that that's the way it was supposed to be and moved on. And I was like, oh man, how did that happen? Because obviously I went over it. It didn't do that when I went over it 5 times beforehand, but
Or when you
and
have a spelling error that you've looked at that presentation 50 times and then you finally catch it, but you're up presenting when that
yeah,
happens.
yeah, yeah. That's a tough one. But your point is about colors and is a good one, especially those that are presenting for the first time, because on your computer screen, that color it may look very different than on a screen in a projector,
Oh,
right?
especially when you're in like a hotel ballroom and they've got a
Yeah.
10-year-old projector and you don't know what
Mhm.
laptop is going to be there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
try to keep my slides as simple as possible.
Yeah, yeah, you can get in some danger as well that it doesn't look quite as good as it did on your home laptop.
Right.
So, all right. Oh, very good. And then, so you know what? I forgot to mention it before. You mentioned interns. You mentioned that you have interns. I think you mentioned yesterday when we were in the prep call that your series of interns that you've had have all found analyst jobs. Is that correct?
Yes. So I've had 6 interns, and
Hmm.
we're actually in the process of hiring the 7th one to come through, but all 6 had been hired full time as analysts by police departments, local police departments, with the exception of my last analyst decided that she wanted to actually be a police officer, but only if she could stay with Eden Prairie. So
Hmm.
she's kind of in the academy role right now to hopefully be hired next summer with our department.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is she an asterisk then?
She is a little bit, but we once she gets out on the road, she's gonna have a year of investigations experience more than
Yeah.
probably all of our new officers, and she's gonna have a lot more investigative experience than them.
It's true. So, what do you feel that you are teaching these interns to have such a nice success rate coming out of the internship?
I think part of it is I'm not treating them like interns, but trying to treat them as equals really from day one. So
Mhm.
teaching them my style of writing and my expectations. But what I tell them is that 3 months in, 4 months into this internship, they're gonna be doing 85% of what I do on any given day. So what I'm asking them to do is no different than what I have to do when, they're gone. And so it's high expectations that they're going to be fully functioning 6 months into the internship and be able to leave and be a full-time analyst somewhere else in the Twin Cities or around the country. But it's kind of teaching them that concise writing style, that presentation style that I have, and how to communicate verbally with other officers and detectives in the department. Because you may have a really, really good idea, but it's going to be how you communicate that of how people are going to respond. So it's kind of all encompassing of teaching them that stuff. And really the 15% that they're not able to do towards the end of the internship is really the more complicated kind of long-term cases that I'm going to hold on to, just because I may have to testify on that 4 years from now. And so it's just easier if I keep those kind of more long-term complicated cases.
Yeah. How long do you normally have the intern for?
Anywhere from the shortest has been, I think, 6 or 7 months, but most are about a year
Okay.
before
Yeah,
they leave.
that's a pretty good chunk. I mean, that definitely gives you time to get into all the stuff you just described. I was thinking like one semester. I was like, wow, that's a lot. You're getting a lot accomplished in like 3 months.
No, except for the last intern, almost every intern has been either near college graduation or has recently graduated from college.
All right. Very good. Well, keep up the good work teaching the next generation.
Thank you. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's finish up with personal interest then. And I love it. Sometimes I just love the fit, right? You're in Minnesota. What would I be thinking that you would be into? Yes, hockey. You play hockey, you coach hockey, you eat, sleep hockey. So I'm taking it you've been playing hockey for quite a long time.
Yep, since I was a little kid, my dad played hockey, got me into hockey, and then as soon as my kids were old enough to be in skates, they both were put out on the rink to play hockey, and I still coach my son's team. He is a bantam now, which is 8th and ninth graders, so I'm head coach for his hockey team.
Yeah. So I've lived in Baltimore, Cincinnati, Nashville, and I've heard of kids playing hockey, but they're very limited in terms of rink time. Like rink time is a big deal, and there's some guys that I know that play as adults. They're playing in leagues where they're playing at like 1 a.m. I'm curious to know that up in Minnesota, I mean, maybe you're not as fighting over rink time as much because there's more rinks.
There is considerably more rinks in Minnesota, and especially in the Twin Cities. So I play in 2 adult leagues, and we do have late times after the kids are done with the ice. But those late times are usually 10 o'clock or 10:30 is the latest I've had games. But my son's ice time is a lot of 9 o'clock at night, but nothing past midnight.
No. But as you mentioned yesterday too, that this has helped you build relationships with other officers, other networks, because they may be into either coaching or playing themselves.
Yeah, we have several of my coworkers here in the police department, detectives and officers, all played hockey and all have kids in hockey. So there's a lot of hockey talk of drills and coaching experiences. And actually in my cube, I have 3 hockey sticks and a couple of stick handling pucks that are just available for detectives as we're talking about a case and working a case out of what still needs to be done. It's kind of the thinking stick where detectives will come in and just stick handle with a stick handling ball and a stick as they're working through it with me.
Oh, that's great.
It's very, very hockey centric here.
So what position do you play?
Well, so I captain one team and I run another league. And so by default, a lot of times I play defense because not everybody wants to play defense. But I do love playing forward and playing right wing, just to have a little bit more scoring opportunities. But I do find myself playing defense more often than not.
And now do you get to watch the pros much, or you're too busy playing and coaching?
Well, we watch a fair amount. I live in St. Paul, so we're close enough to where the Wild play. So we'll often catch games either last minute where we can maybe get discounted tickets. And then the U.S. World Juniors are going to be held in St. Paul here in a couple weeks. And so we're already planning on going to a couple games, including with my son's whole team. So I think we got 40 tickets coming up next week.
Nice.
Yeah, go USA.
Yeah, for the listeners, if you've never been to a hockey game and have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. I feel that it is a unique experience compared to the other sports, and you'll just be able to feel it right away.
It's my favorite live sport because it's just you're on the edge of your seat every time that there's going to be a shot of not knowing whether it's going to go in or not. I've been to all the other pro sports several times, and I always felt like whenever I've attended a pro football game, I've just enjoyed it better being at home with all the stops and stuff. But yeah, I love watching a hockey game in person.
Very good, Ryan. All right. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for all the work and contributions you are doing up there in Minnesota. We're going to finish up with Words to the World. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Ryan, what are your words to the world?
My words to the world are just so simple of being kind and making sure that you're giving back. And that's one of the reasons why I love coaching youth sports and also the mentorship and internships that I've tried to provide. That there were a lot of people that took a chance on me and gave me an opportunity to do a job that I could never imagine doing when I was in college. But now I can't imagine doing anything different. And so I wouldn't be here if certain individuals hadn't given me the opportunity. And so I want to make sure that I'm giving others that same opportunity.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Perfect.
But I do appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Oh, thank you so much. I've had a great time.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.